Hi, welcome to week 2 of Nursing 6018, and today we're going to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of writing grant proposals. In the not-for-profit world, grant writers talk about telling your story and how important it is to tell a compelling story. And as a matter of fact, there's a really great book that I didn't assign to you, but it's called Storytelling for Grant Seekers, the Guide to Creative Nonprofit Fundraising by Cheryl Clark. And so I took a little bit from that book for this slide in particular. It's just a great book, particularly if you're writing grants for a little bit more creative work, not so scientific. But as I'm going to say throughout the quarter, and I said before, you need to begin with a big picture and then narrow the focus down to your neighborhood or the area that you're really focusing on. And then you get to the need or the problem statement is what grant writers call it. And the problem statement is critical. We need to get a real clear idea of who the people are with the need or the problem. What is the problem or a need? Where do these people live? Why do we care? Why does the problem or need occur? You want this problem statement to be succinct yet compelling to really get the funders' attention. Quite often before agencies will write a proposal for funding, they'll create what's called a case statement in order to have a sheet that they can refer to for donors or whomever, but it also helps people to get their ducks in an order about who the population is, what is the problem, and so forth. And just as it says here, the case statement summarizes the most important facts about the program or the campaign, say a big capital campaign. And it talks about how does the organization help people, so it's a description, who do we help, what vital services do we offer, and then what are our plans for the future is really the program that you're looking for funding for at that time. How will you use the money, and why do we deserve your support? Even prior to putting together the case statement, something that's very critical to this is to create the backstory. And that's really what you all are doing in your literature reviews, is creating a very comprehensive backstory, even though you may not use all the information you pull together, but you really need to know that backstory in order to answer the most critical questions in your proposal. And it's really almost like writing a book of fiction where you really have to create for all the characters in that story, for example, their whole backstory, where they went to school, where did they grow up, and so forth, for the book to come across as credible and believable. So think about it in that way, that you really need to do your due diligence in putting together the backstory and case statements when you're going for funding or just trying to convince someone to support your proposal. I have put a couple of examples of case statements on the webpage here after you finish the slides that you can look at. And one of them is for Youth Eastside Services, and I just chose that organization because I'm familiar with it. A friend of mine did some development consulting work for them and created this case statement page that I've got a link to. And then I also put the example that Lauren and I came up with for our Lake City project for the homeless, because we found as time went by we needed to get our story across in a quick and succinct way to let people know what we were doing. So it's very, very handy. And then next, in writing the proposal, of course, you want to build in credibility. You want people to really believe that the data that you put forth is well researched and comes from good sources. So, of course, you want to obtain firm data for the incidence of the problem, the prevalence, has it increased, decreased? If you can include trends, very, very helpful. How does it compare to similar areas? One of the students in the past was doing a project on colon cancer for Native Americans, and the incidence of colon cancer was so much higher for this particular group than the general population, it was just startling. So that comparison was very helpful in the paper to demonstrate the need. And what's the demand for the service? I mean, is this just going to be for a very small population, or could it be replicated across other populations as well? So perhaps it's a pilot and you're demonstrating, then you plan to replicate it. Pilot data or other programs with tested outcomes and results. So you are perhaps replicating something that has been quite successful. You'd want to put that into your proposal as well. Now, Cheryl Clark in her book says that you should build conflict and tension into your story. You want this to be compelling, as we said before. And she suggests creating sort of a story arc with unfolding events. You know, you want to invite that reader into your universe and talk about the problem as it exists, and build some tension into that as you describe the problem. Now, we're not writing a novel here, and I know in a scientific proposal you need to be more factual, but you can build a little bit in there and put a human face on it. And as we talked about before, you want to create that backstory first, so you really have the research. And even in a scientific proposal, you can use an anecdotal story to illustrate the problem, which can really put a human face on and help it be a little bit more compelling. And I've got a couple of examples for that. So the first example is again from Youth Eastside Services, and you can see this right on their website, right on their front page, I believe, right now. And they're talking about a boy that got services there, and his name is Placido, which reminds me of the famous tenor, Placido Domingo. Placido came to YES when he was 14 because he was struggling with drugs and gangs. He had been suspended from school, getting into fights, and resisting his family's efforts to help him. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at night and missed many of his classes. Then he was referred to YES. And then you have some quotes by Placido. When I first came to YES, I didn't care. I didn't want to talk, but didn't know I needed help. At YES, Placido received the support he needed, and etc., etc. And this goes on for another few sentences and so forth. But it really puts a face on the population, the target population that this service is trying to reach. Now, this is an example from a homeless services shelter in Colorado, I believe, and I just got this off the web. I thought it was kind of a compelling story, and it was in a newspaper article. Trenton King took a bad fall in Boulder Canyon last February and got soaking wet crossing the creek back to his truck. He had a broken arm, and after a week in his truck developed frostbite in his feet. Doctors told him he needed long-term care, so forth, so on. And then a quote by this fellow, "I don't know what I would have done without it. I'm grateful because without this program, I might have lost my feet." If you can really hone in on something like that, that this service actually prevented this gentleman from losing his feet to frostbite, which is certainly a real danger with the homeless, it just brings it home that the work that you're doing is worthwhile and worth funding and supporting. Now, if we were in class, I would have you do this exercise, which really helps to create some kind of a dialogue for your story. But since we're not in class, you might want to do this with a classmate, or perhaps you might want to interview one of the patients or the recipients of the service, or whomever is going to be involved in the project, to give you some dialogue for to put a face on your project. It's kind of a fun exercise to do, and I recommend it to get your creativity flowing for this particular piece of your proposal. So just to reiterate again, as you start writing your background and significance, after you've written your wonderful introduction, and it's very compelling and draws the reader into the problem, if you haven't already immersed yourself in the literature, then you need to do so. And again, for your proposals, you're going to want to take that hourglass approach where you start out very broadly with your introduction page with the national or bigger picture, and then narrow down to the local population, the neighborhood, the population that you are looking at, and the specific problem that you are addressing. And then zoom back out for an overview of the literature and the problem, and at the end of that, reiterate the purpose. You are not going to be doing that background and significance section for this course, but it's good to keep in the back of your mind for your capstone and scholarly project proposals. So if you're going to submit your proposal to a funder for funding, what are they looking for? Well, first of all, they want to know that your proposal, your idea, program fits with the priorities and objectives and values of that particular funding organization. For example, you're not going to submit, obviously, a proposal to the American Cancer Society to do a program around diabetes because that's not their priority values and so forth. In terms of their context assessment, does it play an important role in that field, the field that they're really focusing in on, as I said? Is it feasible? Is it effective? Is it efficacious? So you're going to have to convince them. Is the timeline, for example, feasible? Do you have the resources that you're going to put in addition to what you're asking that foundation for that will make it feasible? What are the leaderships and strengths of your own organization, the team that you put together, and do they match what the objectives of the program that you're putting forth? Financial strength. So the funder's looking not just to fund the entire thing, but what do you bring to the table in terms of resources again? Or are you going to other funders for different pieces of the project? Because quite often funders don't want to be relied upon for the entire bankroll of a program. What is your operational capacity? What other kinds of resources do you have available that may add to the help and the success of this program? Are there other experts that you can draw from within the organization or outside of the organization, that partnerships and so forth that you have that will come into play? So obviously, before you even approach a foundation, you're going to need to perform some research on that foundation to determine whether it's the right fit for you. What's the focus and the mission of the foundation? What have they funded in the past that looks kind of similar to perhaps what you're doing, or along the same lines? Who are the board members and the decision makers? Is it possible for you to approach one of them through your network to see if it would be a good fit? This is done all the time, and I think those of us who are not in this business don't realize that it's not only acceptable but even desirable to feel a foundation out before you send in a proposal. People who do this for a living, for example, we have a whole crew of development officers at Seattle University, will approach the Gates Foundation or whomever, talk to them, what are their priorities, do they think this would be a fit, and really talk to them about what are they looking for before we put pen to paper, etc., and turn in a proposal to that organization. We go to great pains to develop long-standing relationships with that funder because we're going to want to go back to them again for funding if we're successful the first time. But mainly, what you want to look at is from the view of the funder, how will your project help this foundation further their work? So it's not all about you, but really more about them. How will it help them meet the goals of their mission statement? And then, of course, you need to look very carefully at the application process and the steps that you need to take to fill out the application and so forth. And again, talking with one of the development officers there can be very helpful in that. I've got some websites on Canvas that help